Some wars are fought with guns, others with shadows. But this one, the Cold War, was fought in silence, in coded messages, and in the hearts of men who trusted no one. Let's pause here for a second and tell me, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it there? Because somewhere in the world, even now, two invisible empires are still watching each other, a rivalry born not from borders, but from fear itself. If you're ready to step into that world of paranoia, betrayal, and power, stay with us. This is Spy Wars Declassified. After the Second World War ended, the world split into two visions of control. On one side stood the United States, draped in capitalism and democracy, holding the promise of freedom. On the other, the Soviet Union, shaped by socialism and driven by a belief in equality through authority. But beneath these ideologies was the same hunger: domination. And from this hunger were born two monsters of intelligence, the CIA and the KGB, agencies that would wage the deadliest silent war in human history. The year was 1947. The CIA was founded under the National Security Act, replacing the wartime OSS. Its mission: to protect American interests from the spreading red wave of communism. Across the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union formalized its own secret empire, the KGB, the Committee for State Security. But while both agencies claimed to protect their nations, their true purpose was far darker: to manipulate, infiltrate, and control every corner of global power. The Cold War was not about armies, it was about information. Knowledge became the deadliest weapon. Both sides built vast networks of spies, scientists, and informants. They recruited diplomats, journalists, and even lovers. Every handshake was a risk, every friendship a potential betrayal. Governments turned cities into chessboards. Berlin became a battlefield of invisible moves, a place where Western and Eastern agents exchanged briefcases in smoke-filled cafes, and where loyalty could mean your life or your death. At first, the conflict was subtle. The CIA worked to influence elections in post-war Europe, funneling money and propaganda into political parties to block communist influence. Meanwhile, the KGB infiltrated those same parties, planting agents, intercepting communications, and feeding false intelligence back to Washington. It wasn't long before both realized the terrifying truth: they were reflections of each other. Each believed it was saving the world. Each believed the other was evil. And both were willing to destroy anything in their way. In the early years, psychological warfare became the new battlefield. The CIA launched Operation Mockingbird, quietly recruiting Western journalists to shape public opinion. In return, the KGB perfected its art of disinformation, seeding false narratives into Western media and fueling fear from within. No one trusted the truth anymore, and that was the point. The world's superpowers no longer needed to invade. They could make you question what was real. The KGB became the Soviet Union's most powerful arm, answerable only to Moscow's top leadership. Its reach was total. It watched foreign enemies and its own citizens alike. In the United States, the CIA operated with similar autonomy, conducting missions across the world with little oversight. Both agencies began to expand beyond borders. Latin America, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia became silent theaters of their invisible war. The CIA orchestrated coups against socialist governments. The KGB supported revolutions to install them. But espionage wasn't only political, it was personal. The Cold War turned human beings into tools. Ordinary people became spies, sometimes without even knowing it. Diplomats turned informants for a suitcase full of cash. Scientists defected across borders, carrying stolen blueprints of weapons and technology. Men and women lived double lives, waking each day to the fear that someone, a colleague, a friend, even a spouse, might be watching. The CIA mastered covert interventions. From the overthrow of Iran's Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953 to manipulating regimes in Latin America, it treated nations like pawns in a global game. The KGB responded with its own brand of shadow warfare: assassinations, blackmail, and seduction. Their agents weren't soldiers. They were illusionists, making truth disappear. Both agencies developed psychological operations so advanced they blurred the line between manipulation and madness. In Moscow, paranoia ruled. The KGB's Lubyanka headquarters became a fortress of secrets. Every whisper could be treason. Inside the CIA's Langley compound, the same paranoia echoed. Every file, every phone line, every agent was under suspicion. As both sides tried to outsmart each other, they began to mirror one another in cruelty. Torture, surveillance, and brainwashing weren't accidents. They were policy. Ideology had become a disguise for control. One of the earliest and most symbolic moments of this invisible war came in 1960, when an American U-2 spy plane piloted by Francis Gary Powers was shot down over Soviet territory. Washington claimed it was a weather aircraft. Moscow revealed the truth. The embarrassment shattered illusions of superiority. Both sides were caught spying, and both realized how close they were to catastrophe. That same year, the KGB expanded its foreign operations, planting deep cover agents in Europe and America. Some lived entire lives under false identities, raising families, holding real jobs, spies who never returned home. Yet, despite the danger, there was a strange respect between enemies. CIA agents studied KGB methods. KGB operatives admired CIA efficiency. Each side knew that behind every operation, every coded transmission, every silent kill was a human being risking everything for a cause that neither side could ever truly win. The Cold War had turned into something greater than politics. It had become a religion of fear. Citizens lived under the constant threat of nuclear annihilation, told that the enemy was everywhere. And in many ways, it was true. Because the real enemy wasn't a person or a nation. It was the idea that power demanded secrecy and that truth was a threat. As the 1960s closed, the invisible war deepened. Both agencies expanded their operations into every continent. Africa, Asia, and Latin America became playgrounds of manipulation, propaganda, and hidden wars. The CIA armed rebels. The KGB funded their enemies. Entire nations were caught between two ghosts, and no one could see who was truly pulling the strings. But what neither side understood then was that this war would never truly end. The fall of one empire would not destroy the other. It would only make the shadow longer. The KGB and the CIA had created a new world, one where truth could be rewritten and history could be owned. And that was only the beginning. Previously, we revealed how the KGB and CIA were born from fear. Now we opened up how their duel became an art form. An invisible chess match played not with soldiers, but with secrets. By the late 1950s and through the 1960s, the world had become a stage for two intelligence empires locked in a psychological and technological arms race. Every invention, every coup, every defection was not just a victory. It was proof of supremacy. And in this silent war, truth itself became the first casualty. The CIA, under leaders like Allen Dulles, turned intelligence gathering into a global enterprise. It no longer waited for information. It created it. Through networks of foreign agents, underground contacts, and shell corporations, it extended American influence across continents. But the KGB was no less cunning. From its base in Moscow, It directed legions of illegals, agents who lived under deep cover in the West, assuming entire false identities. They raised families, held legitimate jobs, and blended so perfectly that even their neighbors never suspected a thing. These agents weren't James Bond-style heroes. They were ghosts in plain sight. The Cold War wasn't only about political secrets. It was about technology, science, and nuclear power. The CIA and KGB each raced to steal designs, formulas, and systems that could shift the balance of power. Soviet spies penetrated the Manhattan Project and stole U.S. atomic secrets, giving Moscow the bomb years ahead of predictions. In return, American operatives infiltrated Soviet research centers, sending back blueprints for radar, jet engines, and missile systems. Espionage had become the new economy, where knowledge was currency and betrayal was its price. Berlin remained the epicenter of the Shadow War. The city, split between East and West, became a living map of ideological conflict. The Berlin Wall, built in 1961, didn't just divide Germany, it divided spies. CIA agents used the western side to launch infiltration operations, smuggling defectors and information across. The KGB, in turn, monitored every whisper, using double agents and informants to feed disinformation back into the Western pipeline. It was a theater of mirrors. Even within the agencies themselves, loyalty was uncertain. Double agents flourished. Men like Kim Philby, who rose to senior ranks in British intelligence while secretly working for the Soviets, fed Moscow some of the deepest Western secrets of the century. Psychological manipulation became another weapon. Both agencies learned that controlling perception was as powerful as controlling armies. The CIA's experiments in mind control, most notoriously through a series of covert programs involving drugs, sensory deprivation, and hypnosis, were part of an attempt to create perfect agents or extract perfect confessions. The KGB, equally ruthless, perfected its own forms of psychological pressure: blackmail, intimidation, and compromat, the collection of compromising material used to control targets without firing a single shot. In the spy world, fear was more effective than bullets. As tensions rose, the line between espionage and warfare blurred. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 was perhaps the closest humanity came to annihilation, and behind the scenes, both intelligence agencies were deeply entangled. CIA reconnaissance revealed Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, leading to a confrontation that could have destroyed the world. But while Washington and Moscow negotiated publicly, the real battle was fought in silence. KGB signals intercepted U.S. naval movements, and CIA agents tracked Soviet supply ships in the Caribbean. Every move was a gamble. One misstep could have ended civilization. In the end, both sides stepped back, not out of trust, but out of the realization that total victory meant total extinction. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, espionage evolved into a new dimension: propaganda. The CIA poured resources into cultural influence, funding films, books, and art that promoted Western ideals. Jazz tours, academic exchanges, and magazine articles became tools of persuasion, showing the world a freer, brighter America. Meanwhile, the KGB built its own propaganda machine, one that excelled in sowing doubt. It circulated stories that undermined the U.S. government's credibility, manipulated journalists, and quietly turned American freedoms into vulnerabilities. Where the CIA offered inspiration, the KGB offered suspicion. Both sides understood that true control came from shaping belief. The KGB's Department D specialized in active measures, operations designed to distort reality itself. It spread forged documents, fake letters, and conspiracy stories that seemed plausible enough to stick. These tactics laid the groundwork for what modern analysts now call Information warfare. The CIA, in return, refined its use of covert media manipulation, embedding messages into films and journalism that supported American policy goals. Truth was no longer objective. It became a weapon in itself. The cost of this invisible war was enormous. Agents who lived under false names lost their sense of identity. Families were torn apart by betrayal. Some disappeared entirely, their bodies never found, their missions erased from official memory. Defectors lived under constant threat, both from the enemies they had betrayed and from the governments that no longer trusted them. In both Washington and Moscow, paranoia became routine. Every embassy, every meeting, every handshake could conceal a listening device or a spy. By the late 1970s, both the CIA and KGB had become omnipresent institutions. They influenced elections, toppled governments, and shaped economies. Their power reached beyond national borders, turning the planet into a giant chessboard of influence. Yet even as they gained dominance, they began to lose control. Intelligence failures multiplied. Agents were compromised. Internal leaks exposed operations once thought untouchable. The balance of terror that kept the Cold War alive began to shift toward chaos. What neither side yet realized was that the real collapse wouldn't come from bombs or invasions. It would come from within, from disillusionment, corruption, and the erosion of belief in their own cause. Both the CIA and KGB had grown too vast, too secret, too powerful for their nations to truly understand them. They had become mirror images of each other, two faces of the same obsession: the need to know everything and trust no one. The deadliest spy war in history wasn't fought on battlefields. It was fought in hotel rooms, embassies, and shadows. And as the Cold War entered its final decades, that war would reach its most dangerous form, where betrayal was not the exception, but the rule. By the late 1970s, the KGB and CIA had reached a point of silent saturation, both drowning in secrets, disinformation, and deception. The spy war was no longer about ideology, it was about survival. Every operative, every code name, every double agent became a piece of a vast, unseen puzzle. And in this game, betrayal wasn't just inevitable, it was institutional. At the height of this silent conflict, each agency believed it had outsmarted the other. The CIA trusted its growing network of informants deep inside Eastern Europe and the Soviet military establishment. The KGB, on the other hand, had placed moles within Western governments, intelligence services, and even NATO command structures. Each side moved with confidence, unaware that many of their most trusted agents were feeding their enemies all along. The seeds of betrayal had been sown long before. Inside Langley, the CIA's obsession with secrecy had created fertile ground for internal corruption. Agents operated in isolated compartments, often unaware of what their colleagues were doing. It was within this structure that one of the most damaging betrayals in CIA history took root. A senior officer, motivated by ideology, money, or perhaps sheer ego, began passing classified information to Moscow. A flow of secrets so deep that entire CIA networks in Eastern Europe were rolled up and executed. While the world saw calm diplomacy between Washington and Moscow, a silent purge was taking place behind the Iron Curtain, with informants vanishing overnight. For the KGB, betrayal came from an unexpected direction. In an age when ideology was fading, greed became the new temptation. Western intelligence agencies had learned that Soviet officers were not immune to the allure of money and freedom. Through subtle approaches, promises of visas, safety for families, or hidden bank accounts, Western operatives flipped KGB officers who began leaking details of Soviet operations from within. The KGB's once fearsome shield began to crack, not from American technology, but from human weakness. The Cold War's spy war became increasingly psychological. Both sides learned to weaponize mistrust. Disinformation campaigns were launched not just against enemies, but within their own organizations, to test loyalty, to smoke out traitors, to ensure obedience. The CIA would feed fabricated intelligence to suspected leaks to see where it ended up. The KGB mirrored the same tactic, creating a labyrinth of lies that sometimes trapped even their most loyal men. Agents began to fear their own shadows, wondering whether the hand offering them friendship was real or a test. Amid this paranoia, the most chilling aspect of espionage emerged: the manipulation of truth itself. The KGB's active measures went far beyond propaganda. They planted stories that shaped entire world events. Western newspapers unknowingly published Soviet-fed articles designed to destabilize trust in democratic institutions. The CIA countered with its own subtle influence in global media, academic circles, and cultural diplomacy, ensuring the American narrative remained dominant. Both sides began to resemble magicians, masters of illusion, making the impossible believable. It wasn't just information that was manipulated, it was morality. Many spies entered the profession believing they were defending freedom or peace. By the 1980s, most had lost that conviction. Loyalty had become fluid, a currency to be traded for security or survival. The spy war had consumed its own ideals. The KGB, once driven by revolutionary zeal, was now a vast bureaucracy suffocating under political stagnation. The CIA, once the frontier of American ingenuity, had turned inward, haunted by scandals, congressional investigations, and internal mistrust. As global politics shifted, the two giants began fighting invisible battles on new fronts, in the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. The CIA funded anti-communist movements, often arming groups whose causes they barely understood. The KGB retaliated by supporting insurgencies and feeding anti-American sentiment across the developing world. Each believed they were protecting their civilization. In truth, they were destabilizing the same global order they hoped to control. But it was the human cost that defined this chapter of the spy war. Double agents lived in perpetual fear, knowing their usefulness had an expiration date. Defectors who escaped to the West often found themselves isolated and monitored. Heroes for a week, then forgotten. KGB officers who failed were quietly reassigned or vanished under mysterious circumstances. The invisible war left behind a graveyard of unmarked lives, people erased from history for knowing too much. In one haunting pattern, both agencies learned that betrayal always began with loneliness. Spies stationed abroad, living under false names, cut off from their families and their real identities, became easy targets. Western handlers preyed on emotional isolation. Soviet controllers used it to instill fear. The irony of espionage was that those who knew the most about human behavior were often destroyed by it. By the mid-1980s, cracks were spreading through both systems. The Soviet Union was beginning to fracture under economic decay and ideological exhaustion. The CIA, though outwardly triumphant, was increasingly vulnerable to internal leaks. It was a strange symmetry. Two enemies, both bleeding from within, both victims of their own machinery. The spy war that had once defined global politics was slowly devouring its creators. Trust, loyalty, even truth itself had become obsolete. In the silence of encrypted messages and coded transmissions, both sides began to sense that the end was near, not just for their missions, but for the world they had built in secrecy. The Cold War's deadliest phase was no longer about espionage. It was about survival. And in that final struggle, the last enemy standing would not be another nation or ideology, but the shadow each side had created for itself. When the Berlin Wall finally fell in 1989, the world saw fireworks, reunions, and the symbolic end of the Cold War. But behind the celebrations, in the quiet corridors of Langley and Lubyanka, a different kind of silence settled. The silence of exhausted warriors who had fought a war no one would ever fully understand. The decades-long battle between the CIA and KGB had ended not with victory, but with exhaustion. Two titans of secrecy stood staring at their own reflections, each realizing that, in the pursuit of control, they had both become what they feared most: paranoid, untrusting, and bound by lies. The collapse of the Soviet Union did not erase the legacy of its spy empire. Many KGB officers simply changed uniforms, joining new institutions or selling their skills to whoever could pay. In Moscow, the archives were sealed, the secrets buried, and the ghosts of old operations left to haunt history. In Washington, the CIA too faced a reckoning. Congressional hearings, leaked operations, and moral scrutiny revealed a pattern of manipulation and deceit that had often mirrored the very system it claimed to oppose. Both sides had built their worlds on illusions of superiority, righteousness, and control. Yet, as the dust of the Cold War settled, the truth emerged. Espionage had not preserved peace. It had only postponed the inevitable chaos of human ambition. The CIA and KGB had fought not just for nations, but for the idea that knowledge itself could be weaponized. And when that illusion collapsed, so too did the certainty that anyone truly won. The spy war left scars that remain invisible but deep. Families torn apart by double lives, nations destabilized by covert operations, and a global culture of mistrust that still lingers today. The techniques perfected in that era, disinformation, manipulation, psychological warfare, continue to echo in modern conflicts and online propaganda. The Cold War may have ended, but the mindset it created never truly died. Today's intelligence agencies are still playing the same game, only with new tools. Satellites have replaced microfilm, cyber espionage has replaced coded messages. But the essence remains unchanged: deception, infiltration, and influence. The battlefield has shifted from the streets of Berlin to the networks of cyberspace. Yet the players are still shadows, unseen, unacknowledged, and unaccountable. In the end, history will remember the CIA and KGB not as heroes or villains, but as symbols of human obsession, the desire to know everything, control everything, and trust no one. Their rivalries shaped the 20th century, but their methods shaped the 21st. And so, as we close this topic, Spy Wars Declassified, remember, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling spy stories. The most dangerous wars are not fought with weapons, but with information. And the most powerful spies are not the ones hiding in the dark, but the ones controlling what the world believes is true.